Hi, welcome. I'm Mastura, Debra Graugnard. I'm with the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, and I have with me today in the big picture, Dr. Cheryl Ritenbaugh. Welcome, Dr. Cheryl Ritenbaugh.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let me tell you how this came about, because we're not a part of any summit or radio show or podcast or anything right now. But Cheryl and I've been with the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism for a number of years, and Dr. Ritenbaugh, Cheryl, graduated from our program with a Master's of Divinity in Spiritual Healing and Counseling back in 2010. And we were on the phone the other day, and Dr. Ritenbaugh was telling me about the work that she's been doing with heart rate variability as a research scientist, and she can correct me if I said that incorrectly in a minute, but she's been doing some work, fascinating, amazing work with heart rate variability and the spiritual healing work that we do, and really bringing the science behind it. And I thought, oh my gosh, we have to get this into a format where people can hear it. So here it is. I'm going to just start off by reading her bio and telling you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to let her tell us about the fascinating work that she's been doing. So thank you for being here. Cheryl Ritenbaugh, PhD, MPH, MDiv, that's Masters of Divinity, Professor Emerita of Family and Community Medicine, Anthropology, Nutritional Science, and Integrative Medicine, University of Arizona, trained in medical anthropology and nutritional sciences. She spent her career in biomedical research, the preponderance focused on nutrition and disease prevention, especially cancer and diabetes. Over the last 15 years, she has been a leader in clinical research on complementary and alternative medicine, winning more than $7 million in research grants, and serving as president of the International Society for Complementary Medicine Research from 2009 to 2011. Dr. Ritenbaugh continues to work to develop relevant measures for complementary and alternative medicine, CAM, evaluating the impacts of CAM therapies in everyday settings. During her Master's of Divinity at the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, she documented the longitudinal process of spiritual transformation among students. Her passion is to understand the physiological correlates of spiritual healing, both local and distant. So, welcome again. Now, let me tell you, she's going to talk to us today about the science of the heart as a communication channel. Our work at the University of Spiritual Healing is all heart-centered, heart-focused. So, Cheryl, if you would, tell these people what you've been doing. It's amazing.
Well, I think one place to start is to say that I really began at USHS in 2001, and so I was going there concurrently with much of the research that I did on alternative medicine. And so, I sort of had my world was going on in two ways. I had this University of Spiritual Healing in the background on one side, and then I was doing this kind of straightforward science on the other. But the experiences I had, both as a healer and as a healee, and all of those things continued to sort of affect how I saw my own research. And always those questions like, well, but how can that work? And so we laughed that in the people doing grant reviews on the science of alternative medicine, you'd sit all day long in this room with all these scientists, and you'd critique these proposals, and did they have the right numbers, and all this kind of stuff. And then you'd go out to dinner and you'd say, oh my goodness, this happened to me. How can that be? And somebody else would tell a story and say, yeah, and how can this happen?
Wow.
So there was like these two levels going on, in which on the one hand you're trying to do good science, and on the other hand the people who are the scientists are sharing their internal experiences. And there were people who were Reiki masters, and there were people who were getting different kinds of spiritual healing, and there were people who are acupuncturists and all this kind of stuff, and they're all having weird experiences. But that's not what they're able to talk about in the scientific room, right? Because you can't be first person. So the trick is to try to keep merging these two. So I was moving forward in my master's and trying to merge it from, I'm a social scientist, so it's kind of the qualitative research side. So that's how I ended up interviewing all these students, because I knew that they were having amazing changes happen. I knew they would have amazing changes happening in their life. I knew what had happened to me and all my classmates. And so we started these interviews, and the interviews were very open-ended, sort of what happened since the last session, and sort of where are you now? Not really very directed. While we were doing that work, I was reading about the notion of spiritual transformation or personal transformation in the literature, and like the hard-nosed sociologists and stuff, they would say, oh, well, people can say they transform, but what really matters is, they might say it, but are they really different under stress, or can other people tell? So we started asking in our questions this just kind of neutral question after people had talked about their changes and everything, say, so can you think about any way that these changes are being reflected back to you? So, are you getting feedback from other people that you're different? Well, people would sort of stop and kind of go, huh, and then tell these amazing stories.
Yeah.
Stories about how their children's ADHD had improved, about how children's social anxiety had improved, about how their relationship with their husband had improved, about how their husband had changed his own behavior, about how their child in prison had quit fighting the guards and become religious. I mean, all of these things, right, are happening. So I got interested in this notion that that healing ripples outward. We know that bad things ripple outward. If someone in family becomes mentally ill or alcoholic or whatever, we know that that's hard on the family, right? But there's not as much attention done to the fact that when people can really change in a positive way, that ripples out too. So I got kind of interested in how is this rippling happening? Because people weren't aware that they were doing something specific to elicit these different responses. And the kinds of things were happening like in the moment. They weren't happening with planned, I'm now a different person kind of behavior. So that was going on. And then when I came, I was had been at the University of Arizona, took a job in Portland, went back to the University of Arizona. And when I got back, they had a center grant to study what was called frontier medicine. So there was a colleague who was studying Reiki. And she had these rats, and she was an immunologist, and she studied rat irritable bowel syndrome. Okay? You didn't know that you could give rats irritable bowel syndrome, but you can, and you do it by stressing them. So she had been working at the VA with this, and then she'd brought her research back to the U of A, and when she made the transition, suddenly all of her rats had IBS. And she was like, what's the matter here? So she realized that the noisiness of the rat colony was giving all the rats IBS, regardless of whatever. So she did this, and she was becoming a Reiki master herself at the same time. So she did this experiment where she put some rats in her control rats like in a quiet cage. Well, they didn't get IBS. And then she took rats in the noisy environment, and for one of them, she sat in the room for 30 minutes a day reading a book. She was the intervener, right, the scientist. She sat there reading a book. And for the other group of rats, she sat in there 30 minutes a day doing Reiki on them. And in both cases, she was maybe 5 or 6 feet away from the rat cage.
Okay.
Not touching them, not doing anything, just sitting there, either doing Reiki or reading a book. So she was the same person present. All of that was the same. So the rats that she did Reiki on didn't get IBS. So here's this like top level scientist who goes to publish this. She knows people in the field. She knows journal editors. She knows reviewers, and they all agree that this paper is pristine in its design. But unless she had a plausible mechanism by which this could happen, they couldn't publish it. And she ended up publishing it in an alternative medicine journal, which is not where she wanted to be. She wanted to be in the Journal of Physiology or, something like that.
Now, so interrupt you for just a second there.
Yeah.
Would you tell us what would be a plausible mechanism? What's an example of what we're looking for?
It's coming.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
All right. So, because in science, unless you put in a chemical, send them an electric shock, they have to know what is it that's transferring between the person doing the Reiki and the animal.
Okay.
So if you made sounds, if you played music, if you did something that was like a known force, right, that would be okay with it.
Yeah.
But she couldn't name a known force at that point.
Yes.
So she got interested in heart rate variability. So when we started talking, I was talking about this phenomenon of people to people, and she was looking at this phenomenon of person to rat. But we were both talking about sort of the same thing. So I got interested in the heart rate variability as well. The other reason that I was also knew about heart rate variability is that it turns out that your heart rate variability is affected by your breathing. And the HeartMath Institute has done a lot of this work on trying to get you, to hold the balloon in the air in their little app or whatever, and they sort of get your heart rate to smooth down. Most of us who are Sufis, by the end of the Fatiha, are in that place. If any of you have ever played with HeartMath, you can probably keep the balloon in the air if you just keep praying. So it just, it happens. So this path plays with heart rate variability. That's in
yeah. Let me just say real quick there, for those who are not into the Sufi work or the Sufism, that Fatiha is an opening prayer. It's an opening prayer that we say with with all of the prayers that we do, pretty much, and pretty much say it all the time. So
yeah, we say it many times a day, right?
A general prayer that it's invoking the name of God and just making it's an opening, centering prayer. We'll just leave it at that. But I just wanted people to know what that is, just in case.
I think that's perfect, and I think if when people go to the school, they spend a lot of time saying it. And I think the word you use, centering, is really accurate because you get so used to it that it kind of takes you immediately to this other state. Mm-hmm. So students of the university will understand. Other people can sort of think of it as centering activity. So let's see, where was I? So she got interested in heart rate variability and maybe people could feel each other's heart rate variability, because it turns out that your heart produces the biggest electric field of anything in your body. Awesome. And you're basically radiating out waves from your body all the time when you do this. And heart rate variability that we're talking about here is how your heart speeds up when you inhale and slows down when you exhale. So if you're breathing kind of erratically and you're kind of annoyed and you're thinking all sorts of weird thoughts, it's all kind of bumping up and down, and it isn't very smooth from fast to slow. It's just kind of all over the place. Right. But, if you sit back and you settle down and you move into your heart in the Sufi way, and you notice that your breathing kind of slows down and smooths out, then what's happening also is that your heart is speeding up when you inhale because it kind of compresses your heart. Okay. And then it's slowing down as you exhale because there's more room. And this is very well-known phenomenon in physiology. But for humans, as long as we're hassled and busy and running around, you can't see that kind of rhythm going on. It's just kind of when we slow down and stop. Okay, so that's heart rate variability. Now, it would be one thing if our heart rates got in sync, but that's a little hard to pull off because we're different sizes of people and we have different size hearts and different amounts of blood and all this kind of stuff. But actually, the pattern at which we're speeding up and slowing down could get in sync. So if you think of drumming that's not exactly on the beat together, but it's sort of speeding up and slowing down together, you can imagine that there sort of becomes a wave that consists of the speed up and the slow down.
Okay.
So that's a way that hearts can talk to each other, I believe, without them being exactly on the same beat together. It doesn't have to be. The rhythms are exactly the same, but if they're speeding up and slowing down, they're kind of doing the same thing together. Okay. So when we breathe together, our hearts speed up and slow down together.
Okay, so the variability is what's in sync.
Yes, the variability is in sync. Okay, so that's why I talk about heart rate variability. So now if we breathe together, our hearts are going into this variability together. So where do people breathe together? Well, one place they breathe together out in the world is when they sing together. Well, why is song so powerful, especially when a whole group of people are all standing together and singing? Most people have had this experience of really amazing moments when that's going on. And those of us who are addicted to choir think that that's why we do it, right? There have been studies of churches, and it turns out the people who are in the church choir have a higher rating of their personal wellness than people who aren't in the church choir. Now, you could argue that it's the social support of a church choir, but I've been in church choirs, and you don't really necessarily even know each other. It isn't a social support environment. It's a singing together environment. So that's kind of suggestive that there's something about getting your hearts in rhythm, even if you're not using it as a healing or something. So there's a lot of intriguing stuff out there. And it's so intriguing that this heart rate variability and choir thing got published in this big science journal called PLOS1, which is something Public Library of Science. And it's a big deal to get published there, okay? So this is like, wow. So this guy wired up people in a choir, their hearts, and the conductor. And then they took the heart rates of people across like a whole choir session. And they played with different things. So they had songs in which the parts were all in unison, and they had songs in which the parts were all moving differently. And by just looking at the heart rate, you could tell which section someone was in and what part they were singing.
That is just
and just by looking at the heart rate variability, you could tell where the conductor was putting his attention.
Now, this
he was basically breathing with them and singing with them, right? And then they blindfolded the conductor. And they found that when the conductor had his eyes open, he was leading them. His heart rate variability was slightly in advance of the choir. But when he was blindfolded, he was listening to them and he was slightly behind them. So you could tell.
He was pushing them into synchronization. When he was looking at them, they were guiding him, or he was following them into synchronization when he was blindfolded.
Yes.
That is so fascinating.
So, okay, so this is going on around us. This is not, this feels woo-woo when you're in the middle of it, but, it's like known effects, right? Because if you breathe together, this happens. Well, we're intrigued by whether it's just the breathing or whether people actually are sensing that their hearts are in sync. So if it was a human and a rat feeling the heart rate variability, it's not because they're breathing together. It's not because the conductor's conducting them together. It's like something's communicating. Well, Anne Baldwin, so along the same path, then got interested in heart rate variability. And she was the person who did the rat and Reiki study, and she's a Reiki master. She got intrigued by equine therapy. And that's where people go and sit with and they're with horses, and the horse is in a paddock. And there's a whole protocol where the person gives the horse appreciation. And then if it's a therapy session, they think about their problems and they feel the presence of the horse, and people get tremendous relief. And like the horse doesn't do anything, but often once the person sends appreciation, the horse will come over to them and put the horse's head in the person's lap and this kind of thing. So she's like, well, how does that happen?
Yeah.
So she ended up wiring up the horse, right? And doing heart rate variability on the horse at the same time that she did it on the human.
Okay.
And so the horse's heart is going a lot slower, right? It's a big heart, and this is a big animal. And the person's heart is littler, and it's beating faster. But she could show that the heart rate variability, the pattern of speeding up and slowing down of the horse, actually entered the human's heart rate. Now, the person wasn't breathing with the horse.
What do you mean?
So this wasn't
the person's heart rate.
So if you looked at the pattern of variability, like how fast and slow, and so this might be 1, 2, and that would be it sped up and it slowed down.
Okay.
Or it could speed up and slow down. 1, 2, right? So that would be a different rate of change.
Okay.
Okay? So the horse is more like 1, 2, right?
Okay.
And humans never have that kind of pattern. But the human then kind of started breathing in a way that also sort of had, or something that had that rhythm in it. Their heart started showing a speeding up and slowing down component that matched the horse.
Wow.
And the horse was ahead, so the horse led. Okay? All right? So we're like, the horse can lead the person.
Yeah.
So then, all right, so then when hearts connect, what's happening to the person? They're feeling a sense of love and trust and relief and taken care of. And they can clear stuff that's bothering them. Well, that's an awful like Sufi healing. Thank you very much.
Right. Yes. Yes, very much.
So one of the things that Anne and I thought about was, well, maybe one possibility is in terms of the horse-human relationship is that the thing that parallels for the human being is when they were a fetus or in utero or a newborn. They had a very small heart. Their mother had a very large heart. They're experiencing the small heart versus the large heart. So I said to Anne, could this be what's going on with the horse? And she said, yeah. And I said, so do you have any horses in herds or horses in colts or anything? And she said, yeah. So she went back and looked. And it turned out that when horses and colts are together, the heart rate variability of the mother horse shows up in the heart rate of the colt. So, that was kind of evidence that maybe this is what's going on. And we began to sort of speculate wildly that horses think humans are sort of colts.
Huh.
Right? So they sort of like, they're feeling a little tiny heart in their field. Wow. And so, this is kind of like a colt. We'll go over and check it out. We'll nuzzle it, So there's some of that behavior. And so we're communicating with our hearts. There's communication across species.
And
right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So then,
can I interject something that's coming up for me? Because, we, as healers, we will often notice that when there are things going on, for instance, showing up in a child, that it can often be an expression of what's happening in the family that's not being talked about, right? That's not being dealt with. So when you think about, the tension between the parent's heart or the erratic, heartbeat, and that,
scrambled and
then
difficult.
This child is experiencing the effect of being in that field and just displaying what it knows how to display and express, right, because it doesn't have the filters that we have, and hasn't learned how to suppress himself or herself, right? So that would be one explanation for how that might happen, even when things are not expressed or talked about.
Right. See, I think as humans we take things in on more channels than we give ourselves credit for. We know about hearing and we know about seeing, but we take things in through smell, and we don't think about that very often. And people who are attracted to each other, men and women who are attracted to each other, often like the smell of the other person.
Right.
Not their cologne, or, maybe it is a mixture of their soap they choose to use and whatever else. But there's something about that which we don't think about. Mm-hmm. And they've done weird experiments like giving women, or women in college dorm or something, because they always experiment with college freshmen, right? So letting them smell different dirty T-shirts of men and saying, which one they like the best. And then if among them there is their boyfriend, they're going to pick out their boyfriend's T-shirt.
Yeah. Well,
based on smell.
You've been married a long time, but it's been in the dating world, that smell is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you, from the other perspective, if you don't like the person's smell, well, that's just not going to work.
Right. Totally.
That relationship doesn't work.
But that's not something we normally think about as a communication channel.
Right.
But it is. Right. So, and some people have sort of geomagnetic sense. They always know where north is. They know where north is in the night and the day and the clouds and whatever, and and other people never know where north is. They're just like, ah. And so I think we also have some magnetic sense that we don't really understand. So, I think humans are monitoring a whole lot more stuff than we're usually given credit for. So when you think about that child in that situation, it could be monitoring all these channels. People who are upset are smelling different than people who are calm. All of those things are going on. And there's this child that's monitoring everything.
Yeah.
And it's a bad situation. They know it.
Yeah. Because as we grow and we on a subtle level, recognize that these sensitivities that these perceptions that we're having are causing our erratic behavior or whatever, and I've got to behave, then we start to shut those things off, right? Close ourselves. A child hasn't put up the walls in the same way that we do. So, or that adults do. So, yeah, that's.
Or another way to think about it is that the child is trying to figure out what's the meaningful signal here I should follow.
Mm.
And if I follow this heart one, I'm getting myself in, it's not helping me in a way, right?
Huh?
They don't know what to do with me. I don't know what to do with me. Maybe there's something else I could follow. They're smiling and jollying me up. Maybe I should, follow that. So I think children are kind of pruning out what they're going to pay attention to based on how it helps them or just makes them feel terrible. So, I think there's probably that.
Right. Definitely.
But when they're little, they're just feeling everything, sensing everything, I guess I would say. So for those of the people listening who are also Sufi healers, you might be thinking, okay, so what's happening when Sufi healers get together, right? Because Anne and she's a Reiki master, I'm a Sufi healer, so we're like, okay, let's try this. So we wired ourselves up. I got to wear the horse monitor. And we were only 2 people, and we did this like 3 times, so that's not science. That's kind of like this is a big anecdote, but it's not science, right? But it's a big anecdote. So we tried to sort of create a way that with each other we could test how our heart rate variability interacted. So when we did that, so here was our test. The person who was the healee, right, who was going to receive the healing, that person's task was to find something they were really upset about and to just hang on to that upset feeling as long as they could. So we're scientists, so a paper that got rejected, a grant they hadn't heard about, something gone wrong in the lab and now they've lost all this time, whatever that was. It was like this really hassly, yucky place. Just grab it and just work it, as hard as you could,
yes.
Right? Well, then the other person's trying to get that to stop. So that was the test, right?
Okay.
So we had healee and healer. So when Anne was healee, she had she could be a Reiki master and do Reiki on me. Not that you can instantly turn these things on or off, but just sort of saying. And then she had some other kind of therapy that she'd learned that was actually involved putting her hands on me. The Reiki was really lightly touching my shoulders, but wasn't massaging or anything, but there was contact. And the other one was more of just an off the body by like a couple of inches, moving her hands around me sort of thing. So she tried both of those. I tried using like a chant of the qualities. So I sort of invoked qualities as one. And in the other one, I just went into what I call the usual USHS healing, where you say the Fatiha inside and go with whatever prayer of the Kuls that seemed to be right. So I was prepared to just, do those for however long that was. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, this is just a prayer form that we all learn. So
yeah.
Anyhow.
And I'll just say qualities are what is also referred to as the 99 names of God, which is actually an infinite number of names, but names like love and compassion and mercy and beauty and generosity and forgiveness and all of these, these qualities that we call qualities or attributes of divine. All right.
Yeah, and as a healer, what happens is that you just sort of get a knowing of what one to use. You don't go in, well, I'm going to use this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. You just kind of let them flow. So that's kind of how a qualities healing goes.
Yeah.
So that was what.
Okay.
So the result was when she did the Reiki healing especially, her heart ended up leading, and it was very she was in like a really sort of repetitive place. And my heart rate variability ended up sort of catching with her second. And as the healee, the experience was at some point I couldn't stay in the hassle anymore. It just like dropped away.
Right.
It just dropped away. And so then her heart was leading mine, and, that happened kind of like the horse.
Except for you were the horse monitor and she became the horse.
Yeah. So then when we reversed roles, and for her, Reiki worked better than her other method. That, I didn't quite get it. The heart rate stuff wasn't as clear. It made me feel better, but the numbers didn't look as persuasive. When I used qualities, which has a chant-like aspect to it, it's repetitive, like that sort of. Well, and kind of like your breathing might be, so it's chanty. It sort of looked a lot like when she did the Reiki. It broke for her and stuff like that. But when I did the Fatiha, it was just kind of like something came, it's this blanket came down on both of us, sort of whump at the same moment.
Wow.
And our heart rate variability went simultaneously into a matching rhythm. I wasn't leading, she wasn't leading. It's like something else was leading.
Mm.
It felt like God was leading.
Mm.
Yeah.
And how did that feel? So there was a change there. Yeah, okay.
I'll tell you what she said, because all I knew was what was happening for me, right? I felt this instant sort of change in my body, that deep breath that you just referred to at the beginning, that happened to me instantaneously. But I saw her take that same breath, because it was like big. And so then when I said to her what happened, she said, I don't know. She said, I was holding on to my hassle, and all of a sudden this like blanket of love dropped down over me, and I couldn't hold it anymore. Mm. And it had happened to the two of us simultaneously. When you looked at the heart rate variability, it had happened simultaneously in the two hearts.
Oh, so one wasn't leading the other. In the
numbers,
yeah,
the numbers said
specific numbers.
You went to this place together. Now you have to know, I wasn't touching her. Both of us had our eyes closed.
Wow.
I was a couple feet away. This wasn't like distant, but it wasn't. When she was doing Reiki on me, she was within inches. I was within feet, a couple feet.
Wow.
So, there's something happening here.
Yeah.
And you can show it, if you just wire yourself up and have a software program that'll look at it. And so I really think there's something going on, first of all, in which hearts communicate with each other. And I think prayer changes our heart's behavior. Heart math has its own methods for doing this. We know that prayer changes us. Other traditions have practices that change us. I think when we all get in a room and are chanting together in what we call vikar, for those inside, for those on the outside, that's like a group of people anywhere from 2 to 200
yeah.
are chanting, right? And are exactly together, and therefore are breathing together, and a lot of it is breathing together. Those are magical experiences. I think that one piece of the magic then is going to be that our hearts are all just doing the same thing. But there's also this third thing that happened when she and I did this, when I invoked God through this prayer. And we repeated it, and it happened every time that we landed. So we were simultaneous with neither heart leading.
Wow.
And we both got hit at the same time. So all I can say is, maybe the way that it's so metaphorically, physically, I don't know, but metaphorically, one way to think about this then is that we're being taken into the heart of God. And we're experiencing our tiny heart in the giant heart of God.
Wow.
Science can't measure the heart of God. All I can tell you is that the two of us were both affected by something. And yes, it had to do with me starting that prayer. And yes, it had to do with me breathing, but she couldn't hear me breathing. And I was already breathing slow because I was starting to think it before I started to actually pray it. So it wasn't that my breathing induced her breathing. But the start of that prayer, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, whap.
Wow. And that means name of the one, the most merciful, ever compassionate.
Right, yeah, in the name of the one God, all merciful, all compassionate. So that's, so I think that's why, I think science can begin, if we start to play with this, and I'm hoping in the coming years that I'm going to have more opportunity to kind of wire people up and not just have this be this healer-healee experiment, but really have a healer working with someone who is in distress.
Yes.
And can see how they move from distress to a sense of peace.
Yes. Wow.
And I've been in a situation.
Pick me.
I was in a situation. Pick you.
Yes.
Well, the thing I don't know how it works, and one thing I sort of have in mind to try if we can get into this business of wiring each other up and working together and being able to view our hearts simultaneously, is to start to work on over the phone healing, because those of us who are healers know that it works over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't explain over the phone at the moment. I have no idea, but
that's what I do all day long.
Right. Right. And
the amazing thing is, my specialty is working with people that have digestive challenges, IBS, Crohn's, colitis. That was my path, and I know how important the healing work was for that, for myself. So that's my focus that I work with people on. And now, you just gave me a great testimonial for the healing work, because that's.
I'll send you the reference. Say, to the person, imagine you're a rat and I'm a Reiki master. You're not a rat. I'm not a Reiki master, but hey, it probably work anyhow.
Yeah, well, it does. Yeah. I can tell you, I've got testimonials all over the place that say it works. So, but from the scientific, just from, this is what we've done and this is what happened. So it's amazing. It's beautiful. But I would love, love, love to be a part of that study.
Yeah. So we'll try to do that. And the other thing that's interesting to me is that I did some work recently with another person, and there were just a number of ways in which, I didn't end up sort of sitting in the relation. We were in her living room, and the way that we were sitting wasn't quite right and stuff like that. And it was really hard to kind of get the flow. And I wasn't sort of in a position where I could be anywhere that I wanted to be. And so I don't know whether when you're person to person, if there isn't something about your physical location that makes it harder or easier for your hearts to connect. It was just kind of interesting that it was just it just didn't happen the same way. And so I'm going to sort of play with her, say with her, come on, let's come to my house. Let's try some different things. Let's see what'll happen.
Well, maybe there are some.
Go on.
Maybe there are some other variables in the physical location. I wonder if electromagnetic frequencies or any of those kind of things that can sometimes you really can feel distorting your energy. If maybe you're syncing up to that instead of the other person.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think that there just might have been maybe a lot of distracting things happening there. I don't know, but it made me really aware that something else that we can look at.
Yeah.
Is how some of the other variables work.
Yeah.
A shielded room versus or a place that has a lot of electromagnetic stuff going on versus not so much. A place where you can be closer to each other and have eye contact in a way, or whether you're farther apart, or just, begin to look at things, especially in a person who's never had this kind of work before.
Right.
So it's and that's sort of the test of what's really the role of heart here. How do you really get heart to work? Yeah. And she had, good things happened. It wasn't that it was she came away angry or anything, but it was just, from my perspective as a healer, it was different.
Yes. Yes.
So it was just interesting to, then be talking to you today and be thinking about, I wonder if there were other things going on besides just, the conversation and what happened. So
yeah.
I don't know.
So you have just tapped into a field that has a potential to be as vast as the heart. And our Sufi teachings, our teacher says you think you are a small star when you contain the whole universe, and the heart actually is that portal to that connection with that all that is, and that the heart is how we would we say travel, but how we come to really know all of the deep secrets of the universe and this eternal, ever-present, unconditional love that is everywhere in all things. So you have just barely started to scratch the surface now of what could just be a huge potential for a science coming to understand these deep mystical teachings that when we hear them, practice them, really take them in, we can have an experience of. But science is just starting to help us to understand it more completely, and just fascinating what you've shared. Fascinating.
The other thing, yes, it's really fun. The other thing is that, as a Sufi, I'm struck by how many of these other practices, like the Dalai Lama's version of a love meditation, a heart meditation, they're really working to come in through the mind. And if you come in through the mind, then you have to get the whole mind quieted down and happy before it can come work its way in what I sort of experienced as a thin little stream down to the heart. I mean, it's sort of like, why not just throw your heart open, I had this odd experience in a group where the person who's bringing sort of heartfulness meditation, compassion-based meditation training, he works for the Dalai Lama. He worked to make a compassion-based training a lot like a mindfulness training so that you could, sit people down and have them do it and have it be, secular in a sense. And I was in the room and, he was talking and talking and talking and talking. And I finally I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I just kind of went, and started just praying and just sat in my heart and waited, kind of for it to be over. And it was one of those things where you sort of think that this was maybe 100 people in the room. I sort of thought he was looking at me. And, a speaker, you don't know if they're really looking at you. And you're sort of like, well, maybe he's listening. So I hung around to the end because I knew the person who was his host and was a colleague of the host. And so I wanted to go up and introduce myself. So I kind of left and came back, and people were all talking to him, and I kind of went to the end of the line. And he kind of kept going like this, looking around, the person ahead of me. And I thought, well, this is weird. And so then I went up and I said, I'm Professor Ritenbaugh, and I'm a college Professor Raison. And he sort of looks at me, and I said, and I'm a Sufi. And my question is, and he went, oh, you're a Sufi. I am friends with some Sufis. And I said, well, is this meditation tradition similar? He says, oh, no. He said, you go directly to the heart.
Wow.
Taking that from the person that the Dalai Lama has given to do compassion-based meditation training was like, well, this really is different.
Yeah, it is different.
And it was, and he could see the difference in my being. Mm-hmm. Because he was a deeply loving, compassionate, being. But for him to say, oh, and it was that he had been wondering. He'd been looking at me and wondering what I was doing, And when I said I'm a Sufi, oh, you're a Sufi. Oh, no, that explains it. So, I think on the one hand, I think we're all trying to go to the same place. But I just want to say that the Sufi road, the science of Sufism that Sidi would talk about, this is a different science than the science of Hinduism or the science of other meditation forms. It's a different science, and I think that we have to respect that. And so I'd like to do sometime the brain science of when we do this, because it's going to look different than the other paths have looked.
Yes.
And I don't know how it's going to look.
Wow. Well, it'd be interesting to monitor the brain and the heart for these different types.
Yeah.
And kind of see, what's possible.
There's not a non-invasive way to do the brain. I mean, you have to lie someone down and, wire them up and stick dye in their veins. And I mean, it's just invasive.
Okay.
And we've had Sufis who were asked to do that, and when they found out what it took, we're like, won't do it.
That sounds so good.
So we're pretty protective of our bodies, I think. And so some of these mechanisms, people are willing to do it. But my colleague who was at the University of Arizona has moved to the University of Wisconsin, where he's working. His name is Charles Raison, and he's working with Richie Davidson, who does all the meditation, wiring up the brain of the masters and stuff. And so I'm thinking once he's settled in of getting in touch with him. And I think the Sufis would be willing to have their brains, with electrodes stuck all over it. That's like probably okay, whereas sticking a dye in your veins and having it light up your brain is kind of a different thing. So
yeah,
I'll be back in touch with him. I'm retired now, so I can go see if we can do something with him.
Awesome. You've got some freedom. Well, I hope that when you find out, you'll get in touch with me again, and we'll do another one of these interviews, and you can give us the update. Yeah.
Well, if we get to play with this in the coming year, then we'll certainly A, include you in the science, and then B, you can plan another one of these to go.
Awesome.
So, just to say to people who are listening, a lot of this is speculative, but it isn't empty. It's got, there's real stuff here. And is there money? Is the federal government intrigued with this question? No. Do we have to fund it off of our, weekends and shoestrings and, a little tiny grant to buy the heart rate variability monitor? Probably. Do we end up relying on retired people like me who can do it in their retirement? Yes. It's going to be done like that because it's a big question to us, but it's not a big question to other people of the, will it solve the healthcare crisis of the world? Well, I think it could help, but I'm not really in a position right now to persuade the federal government that they need to put large amounts of money in figuring out if it's really heart rate variability. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But as healers, we know what we've experienced with ourselves and our clients, and so we know the effects of it. So, I guess for now it will remain one of the mystical secrets, but at least there is something behind it. Yes.
Yeah, and the piece I would leave with everybody who comes to a Sufi healer like you, who is a Sufi healer themselves, who's getting Sufi healings, is to be aware of how when you change, it changes other people. Because I think that's something that we don't think about enough. We don't realize that as we change, we're actually giving a gift to the people around us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yes, definitely. And
so
I've seen that in amazing ways with my own family. Never asked them to change their behaviors, but they just did.
Yes.
The board.
Yes. And I think we need, this is something to be aware of in this path, is as we change, others change, and our healing of ourself, our connection with God, it really does ripple outward to other people. And I don't think we're willing to notice that enough. I think we just, keep working on ourselves and keep dealing with our stuff. But I think look up and see what's happening around us is an important thing to do. It certainly changed my marriage. It's changed,
Beautiful. And on the flip side of that, if you're thinking that the people around you need to change, then know that it's not wasted to do the work on yourself first.
Totally.
Yeah.
You're the only person you can do the work on. I mean, there's that. You don't have control of anybody else, but you can work on yourself, and it might change it in ways you never dreamed.
Yes.
You never dreamed.
Yes. Awesome. Beautiful. Well, Cheryl, Dr. Ritenbaugh, thank you so much for your time today for this interview. I am so excited. I can't wait to hear the feedback from people on the that are listening to this. And by all means, if you have feedback, get in touch with us. Let's see, probably the best way, if you go to sufiuniversity.org, SUFIuniversity.org, that's our website, and there's a contact form there. You can shoot us an email and let us know what you're thinking about, or leave it with the YouTube channel or the Facebook page, which I believe is also facebook.com/SufiUniversity. So by all means, get in touch with us. Let us know what you think about this interview, and if you're interested, get more information. All right. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for listening.